Hello and welcome to Aviation 101 with Laura. I have been requested to make this video, which is going to be a Part 121 regulations review. But before we get to that, I just want to have a quick shout out to listener.io. They have been sponsoring my videos, and be sure to check them out. They offer complete confidence in pilot online counseling services. And there is a link in the video description where you can learn more about that. And you can use my code LAURA for 15% off. So this video is going to be a high-level overview and some little deep dives along the way into Part 121 operational regulations relating to dispatch and are we legal to dispatch a flight. So the checklist that I'm going to basically be running through today is to verify a lot of different things from a dispatch and operational side when we are considering our ability to depart on a Part 121 flight. A lot of these topics I cover in greater detail in other videos, so I will put some in-video links and pop-ups to kind of suggest those. I will link to them in the video description. But again, I'm not going into big detail on any of this, but this is a high-level overview. And also, I've been linking within the slides, you'll see that come up the regulations, so you can look it up and know it for yourself. So the first thing we would want to ask ourselves before we depart is, are the airports we are wanting to fly to listed in our authorized list of airports, which can be found in OPSPEC C70. There's plenty of other stuff on YouTube and on the internet about what OPSPECs are, but OPSPEC C70 is common to domestic and flag operators. Supplemental does not have OPSPEC C70 because they can technically go to any airport so long as the supplemental operator verifies that it meets the requirements that have been established between that carrier and the FAA with the oversight. So we want to make sure our airports are listed in C70. We're going to get to talking about alternates in a little bit. We also would need to make sure our airplane is airworthy. So if there's anything on the minimum equipment list, does that affect our operation? For example, if my weather radar is not operable, then you would have to look in our airplane specific and operator specific, airline specific MEL and see what the limitations are. Now I can tell you, it's basically going to say you cannot operate in areas of thunderstorm potential or at night in areas of thunderstorm potential where you are not able to reasonably see and avoid thunderstorms if you have an inoperative weather radar. And that's just one example. Anything on the configuration deviation list, those are a list of things that could be missing from the aircraft and we still operate the flight. Think things like vortex generators, static wicks, possibly fairings on different parts of the aircraft. Again, it's going to be aircraft and operator specific. Also, we have to make sure our aircraft meets its route and airspace requirements. For example, if we are going to operate in airspace requiring certain RVSM requirements, then we would have to make sure the aircraft's approved for flight in that area. This next part is huge. Way too big to unpack in this video. There's other things you can find. I should probably make a video in the future. So let me know in the comments if you want me to unpack Part 117. I would love to do a high level overview if enough people are actually interested. So, if you're still watching at this point, comment in there and see what do you want to know about this. But Part 117 is the crew legal for flight. Honestly, it's on the crew scheduling, but really dispatch is somewhat involved in this. Then we want to make sure we're loading enough fuel on board. Now I want to point out this video is going to focus on turbine engine aircraft. I am not focusing on turboprops. I am not focused on reciprocating engine aircraft, but the amount of fuel that the dispatcher is going to load depends on the type of operation, domestic flag or supplemental, and whether we need an alternate or not. And I have other videos that you can watch about the fuel requirements. But again, depends on the area, depends on the type of operation. We're going to get to alternates in a second. Weather is a big driver of what we do in dispatch, clearly. So weather determines, do we even need an alternate? Depends on the kind of operation. We're going to get to that in a second. Again, check out my other video about alternate stuff. I have some other ones on there. But weather also determines that the flight can even be dispatched at all. We're going to get there. I have some flowcharts coming because I love flowcharts. Helps me understand things. But weather also determines how I'm going to route the aircraft as a dispatcher. Am I going to go around areas of severe turbulence? I would hope so. I'm going to try to avoid that. It also affects how much fuel is required, like how much wind is going on, how much headwind, tailwind, what is going on. There's all kinds of impacts to that, but we have to consider the weather for lots of reasons, not just fuel planning, but lots of other reasons too. So speaking of weather, I want to unpack some parts of 14 CFR relating to weather. So this is more of my flow chart. Now, first question I'm asking myself, does the METAR at my departure airport show that I have at least the minimum visibility to take off? If no, we can't let the flight leave. That's 121.651. Okay, but if it does show that we can take off, then we have to say to ourselves, we have to check weather reports and forecasts or any combination thereof. That's what 121.613 says. So that is a combination TAF, METAR. I have to consider both. Most airlines, you have to consider the more conservative of whatever those combination of things have. Do these weather reports or forecasts or combo show that the weather will be at or above our minimums at the estimated time of arrival at the destination? So I'm talking about, for most domestic operations, landing minimums, meaning do I show at least the minimum visibility required to land? And I'm going to find that out by looking at the instrument approach chart for my destination for the estimated time of arrival. If weather reports or forecasts do not show that weather will be at or above our landing minimums at the ETA for our destination, then we cannot let the flight go. We could delay the flight, but we can't let the flight dispatch right then. Okay. So if we do get that far, yay, the weather reports forecasts show that the weather will be at or above our landing minimums. Okay, now we have to say alternates, and we're going to talk in a second about do I have alternates, but do weather reports or forecasts, or again, any combination of the two, show that weather will be at or above the minimums needed at my alternate at the estimated time of arrival when getting to that alternate? Once again, I'm going to be checking the weather at the alternate. If that is all good, then I can sign my dispatch release, yay, and monitor the weather. I can change the dispatch release. 121.631 says the dispatch release can be amended. Let's say an alternate goes below the required minimums. To use it as an alternate, I can change that, amend my release if needed. But if the weather is not going to be at or above minimums at my alternate at the ETA, then I cannot dispatch the flight. I would have to make a change, choose another alternate, change my departure time. I can do things, but I can't let the flight go. So hopefully that flow chart is helpful to you. Now, let's look at the weather at departure airport. I mentioned takeoff minimums. So that's 121.651. At the departure airport at time of departure, you're going to be checking your METAR, comparing it with OPSPEC C78, if your air carrier has that, which most of them do. And then you're going to check what we call the Jeppesen 10-9 page, check your airport takeoff minimums. Be sure that we have at least the required visibility to take off according to the METAR. So check. METAR shows minimum visibility for takeoff. Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about 121.613. That's our landing minimums check. All right, we can't dispatch the aircraft unless weather reports, forecasts, or any combination thereof show that weather conditions will be at or above authorized landing minimums when we're going to the airport to where we're dispatching to. That would be my destination. Notice this is slightly different. It is different than our departure check because the departure check involved looking only at the METAR at time of departure. This is for the destination, and we have to consider weather reports, forecasts, or any combination thereof. That's TAF, METAR. Okay, super, super important. Now, so if that happens, then we're check. Yay. But like I just mentioned, if the weather report or forecast or a combination of the two show that weather is going to be below our landing minimums at our estimated time of arrival at my destination, then you can't dispatch the flight. Big key difference of 121 ops. We could cancel the flight to a different day, we could delay it to a different time, but we can't let the flight go if we don't at departure, when we're looking at all this pre-departure, if we can't do the meeting 121.613 requirements. All right, now I mentioned alternates because that's the next thing on the flow chart. So let's talk about that. I have a whole nother video about how to apply the 1, 2, 3 rule. So I highly recommend watching that. But under domestic operations, there is no alternate required if, again, we have weather reports, forecast, or any combination thereof shows that at the time of arrival, plus or minus an hour at my destination, I have a ceiling of at least 2,000 feet above the airport elevation and, very important, and visibility at least 3. So that is the 1, 2, 3 rule. It only applies to domestic operations. Okay. So when I'm asking myself, do I need an alternate? First, I'm really just going to ask myself, can this flight be dispatched under domestic rules? If not, we have to check the requirements for flag or supplemental. Put those regs up in a second. But if it can, we apply the 1, 2, 3 rule. That says METAR TAF, at least 2,000 foot ceiling and 3 miles visibility an hour after to an hour before my estimated time of arrival at destination. Okay, if the METAR TAF shows that whole window, hour before to an hour after, METAR TAF, if it shows that, then I do not need to file an alternate. Yay. Then I need 45 minutes of reserve fuel required. If I don't meet my 1, 2, 3 rule, so let's say the visibility is only 2 statute miles, or the ceiling is only 1,500 feet in my METAR or my TAF, an hour before to an hour after, if I can't meet that, then I have to pick an alternate, and I have to load enough fuel to go to my destination and to my alternate and 45-minute reserve. We're going to talk in a moment about derived alternate minimums to figure out my alternate weather requirements. Okay, I mentioned flag. Again, I'm not going to go into detail on this, but an alternate is required for flag operations. I've got another video about flag domestic supplemental. Unless the flight is no more than 6 hours and it's kind of a weird modification of the 1, 2, 3 rule, but you can look that up in 121.621. Supplemental, super easy rule. All supplemental flights require an alternate. Yep, I used to work at a supplemental air carrier, and every flight we did had to have an alternate. The only exception is if there is no alternate available, because there's just plain old nothing around. Example, Bermuda. Nothing is nearby, and there is only one airport on the whole island of Bermuda that can accommodate a air carrier type aircraft. So there is how far it is from Norfolk, just so you can see it's very far away. It's an hour and 50 minutes at least flying time. So if no alternate is available, because it's not just not there, then you have to have 2 hours normal cruise fuel consumption loaded on board for a turbojet aircraft. 3 hours if you're on a turboprop. Not very good for your load planning because it's a lot of fuel. Okay, so once I've figured out if I need an alternate or not, I'm going to make sure I'm loading enough fuel. Okay, again, I said I have video. There's another video I've got out there about domestic flag supplemental. Okay, we're going to think about our alternates. We're going to think about any delays, potential holding, potential ATC, actions that might delay the flight. And also we have to think about taxi congestion. We have to think about our routing. We have to think about altitude, headwinds, tailwinds, all that stuff. But we're loading enough fuel on board the flight to do everything. And this is computer flight planning. Okay, whether are the alternates, this is another important thing. So again, we can't dispatch the aircraft unless our weather reports, forecasts, or any combination thereof, again, METAR TAF, show that the weather is going to be at or above alternate minimums when we get to the alternate. When we get to the alternate. I said it again, yes, when we get to the alternate, because I hear students that get confused and they say, oh yeah, an hour before and after. And I say, no, stop. An hour before and after is 1, 2, 3 rule. That says, do I need an alternate at all? Okay. So once I've established using the 1, 2, 3 rule that I do need an alternate, I do not have to worry about this plus or minus an hour business anymore. Okay. So I make sure, though, that I do figure out my alternate weather requirements, and I do that at air carriers using OffSpec C55. This allows me to derive my alternate minimums. I am not going into detail on this table because I have like a whole 2-part video series plus an older video that is like my most popular video ever, maybe, on YouTube, all about how to do this table from OffSpec C55. So please don't worry about it if you haven't watched those videos. You are missing out. You should go watch them and then come back to this one. So, okay, the weather evaluation. So if we have the required visibility and the required ceiling in the weather reports, forecast, or any combination thereof for our time of arrival at the alternate, check. Yay. Okay, we're on our way to actually dispatching the flight. Okay, almost. But we have a few other things to consider along the way. Now, there is a requirement under 121.619 to have an alternate airport for our destination where there's a second alternate. Ooh, a second alternate. And the reg just says if destination and first alternate are this word marginal, then we need at least another alternate. So, do I need a second alternate? Marginal weather is one reason why I might need a second alternate. Second reason why would be exemption 3585, sometimes called 17347. Again, another very popular video about that. If you want to know about that, go watch that video. Then you can come back to this one. Okay, but this idea of marginal, okay? If the weather's marginal, then we need a second alternate. What is marginal, you might ask? Well, guess what? Oh, the FAA did not tell us what is marginal. It is up to each airline to do that. They are going to define it in the manual, which is approved by the FAA. So technically the FAA is involved in marginal weather, but it is not defined by 14 CFR, defined by the airline. So here's an example of what an airline might say. And again, I'm not like unpacking this. You can read it. It's just an example, but you have to know what your air carrier says is marginal. And I don't know what your carrier says, or maybe you don't work for one yet, but just realize marginal requires a second alternate. So then I would have to load enough fuel to go to the farthest alternate, then plus any required reserve, depending on if I'm domestic flag supplemental. Okay. Now, we also need to think about another little aspect. Do I need something called a takeoff alternate? Sometimes people call it a departure alternate. Okay. 121.617 says on this one, I look at my METAR at my departure airport, only my METAR is what I'm looking at here. If it shows that it is below landing minimums to come back to land at my departure airport, say for example, I had a issue and I had to come immediately back. Okay, if that would be happening and the METAR at that departure airport shows it's below landing minimums, then if not, I don't need a takeoff alternate. But if it does, then I need to have a takeoff alternate. And this is essentially somewhere we could go if we had a problem on departure. And for a 2-engine aircraft, which is the vast majority of aircraft in use today, not all, but most, then I need to find something within an hour flying time in still air with one engine inoperative, where I could have the flight crew go if they had an emergency after takeoff, or maybe not even an emergency, but if they had something weird happen after takeoff. But because the weather is so low, I can't land back at my departure airport. I go to my takeoff alternate. Okay, if you can use the destination, because it's within that hour flying time, that'd be awesome. That'd be actually preferred. Okay. Put that takeoff alternate on your dispatch release. Okay, So that is takeoff alternate. All right. If the METAR at the departure airport is above required landing minimums for your time of departure, then I don't need a takeoff alternate. Don't have to worry about it. Okay. Of course, make sure that takeoff alternate is listed in OPSPEC C70 and it has required weather, again, per OPSPEC C55, using derived alternate weather minimums, because it is a legitimate alternate, even though it's called a takeoff alternate or a departure alternate. Okay, I also have to check drift down planning. I've got another video about this, but I'll link to that one. But we want to make sure, oh, sorry, this is not drift down. This is routing. So we got to make sure that we don't plan an aircraft to go too far away from an airport so that we are ever more than an hour's flying time, unless our aircraft is equipped for extended range operations, which is beyond the scope of this video. So basically, in its example, this is from my old flight planning software I used to use. The circles show me 1 hour rings, and the red line shown here, and I'll zoom in, shows that the aircraft's path stays within those 1 hour rings. So I'm always within an hour of an airport should anything weird happen. But for example, if the 767 that we used to operate somewhere that I worked, it was 425-mile rings. But if, for example, I planned a flight on, say, that other red line, the more darker red line, that would be not an acceptable routing because I would have gone outside of my 1 hour flying time. Again, I'm not going over super detail on that. Drift down. I did say I was going to get to drift down. Okay. We also can't plan the aircraft to be so heavy that it would, if it lost an engine, that it would drift down and lose altitude and possibly get too close to terrain on its drift down. So we call a drift down alternate if we have to have one for that. Again, I have a video that unpacks that, but we got to check on that. Typically, your computerized flight planning is going to do a check of all the altitudes of terrain along your route and ensure compliance with this. 121.693 says I need to provide a load manifest. So I would then prepare my load manifest. These are all the things that have to be on it. As a very quick example, here is loading a program we used to use for MD-80s, and it showed that we were within the center of gravity envelope. You can actually see it actually charted, and the blue line, it shows what happens to the center of gravity as the fuel is burned. But you notice that for the entire flight, that center of gravity is maintained. We're inside the envelope, and that meant that we could show compliance with adequate aircraft loading. Lastly, you're going to make and sign your dispatch release. This is an old dispatch release that I made a really long time ago where I used to work. And the fuel summary is shown there. We've got a whole compliance thing, names of everybody, and everything is on that dispatch release, all the requirements. You can notice I have alternates listed on the dispatch release, and this is super helpful for the crews, obviously, but it's also a legal requirement to make that dispatch release. It has all the fuel requirements and everything. So in summary, I've got all these check boxes, and then if I've met all the requirements, I can check that last box and sign my dispatch release, send it to the crew, continue to monitor the weather, and amend the release if necessary. So thanks for sticking with me. What else would you guys like to see videos about? Did you like this one? Not enough detail, too much detail? You know, let me know. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. I love comments. I try to read and respond to all of them. So thank you for liking and subscribing, and check out more, hopefully coming pretty soon, from Aviation 101 with Laura. Have a great day.